This is Ian Pickus, and you're listening to WAMC's Congressional Corner. Joining me now is Richard Neal, the Democratic congressman from Massachusetts' 1st District. He's been in office since 1989. Congressman Neal, thank you for coming back.
Pleased to be with you.
Well, as we speak, there's some big breaking news in Washington, which is the indictment of former President Donald Trump. As we are awaiting more details, what's your initial reaction?
Well, I think you described it correctly when you said we'll have to await the details as the indictment charges are unsealed. So I think that'll give us a better chance to react with more knowledge, but not to miss the point that this has been a very controversial case for a lot of very good reasons. And that includes the fact that a president doesn't get to take with them when they leave documents that are marked for national security purposes. Those are given to an individual while they're president, not for a post-presidency.
I know you're a historian of the American presidency and American history in general. This is being described as a very historic moment. Do you see it that way?
Oh, there's no question about it when you view the context of it. I mean, this has an antecedent that dates well back in our history to in presidential impeachments, differences of opinion. But at the same time, I think that a post-president being indicted, I think that sets a new standard and new precedent as we go forward as well. I think part of the controversy here is going to be the popular argument in, I think, journalism today, which both parties and others embrace, and it's called whataboutism. So you'll see in coming days that the other side will make these arguments about further scrutiny of this or that, when the truth is I think the focus here ought to be exclusively upon what the Justice Department has offered up, which will be given to the public in full detail, and there'll be an opportunity for the evidence to be presented and a jury to render a determination.
Some of your House colleagues from the Republican side have said that this is an example of a, quote, weaponized Department of Justice, that this is President Biden pulling strings to settle a score. You don't give that much credence?
I don't give much credibility to that argument. I think that Merrick Garland is the Attorney General of the United States. I think that his career has been marked by great probity, and in addition to which, I think as a seasoned prosecutor, he understands clearly the context of how it's related to American history. And I think that every conceivable opportunity would have been given to the precedent this would have established. So I think that there would have been at the Justice Department a lot of details that await further public examination.
Do you think that this case, and then also some other examples involving former Vice President Trump and President Biden about classified documents, shows the need for any change in how such materials are handled by people who, because of their job at one time, had access to them, and then when their terms ended, maybe shouldn't have?
Well, I think that you don't get to take documents with you. And I think that that's a very important consideration. So I think that, again, it's for the Justice Department and for our national security agencies to depict the context in which these documents moved to a post-presidency. And I think that again, scrutiny is going to be available to all in coming days. And as you await the arraignment on Tuesday, then there will be an opportunity for the charges, as I noted earlier, to be unsealed and then quite vivid for American consumption.
Let's talk about the politics of it before we move on. President Trump has retained very strong support among a slice of the GOP electorate and others. Do you think this will damage him in any way that, keeps him from being the front runner in that party?
Well, I try to stay away from giving Republican presidential candidates advice, largely because I think that they won't pay much attention to it. But I do think that one noteworthy change over the course of the last couple of months as the presidential field mounts on the Republican side has been a greater, I think, enthusiasm for criticizing the former president. I think that there was a time when a lot of Republicans across the country were reluctant to criticize the president at the time, Trump, and former President Trump, largely because they thought that he had such a following in the Republican base. Now, what I think is interesting is that many of these candidates are now taking a vigorously different position than they took in recent months. And I think part of it is not just the candidacy, but I think that they have now seen almost a pattern of challenges based upon violations of the law and would-be violations of the law. So I noticed the former Vice President Pence, he said some things this week that he never would dare to say while he was vice president. I've noticed that Nikki Haley took a more vigorous position in criticizing the president, and certainly former Governor Christie was assertive in his criticisms of the former president. So I think that what you're looking at here now is a change. It's tonal. I think many of these candidates, as they embrace their own positions, feel that they have to criticize the former president in an effort to gain some traction. So it strikes me that they all now see an opening, given on the charges that have been now released during the course of the last few months.
You're a close observer of New England politics. The governor of New Hampshire, Chris Sununu, said he would not run for president, but still there will be a ton of attention paid to the GOP primary there. Do you think, how things play out in New Hampshire could really influence the rest of that race?
Well, I think New Hampshire is but a snapshot in time of a presidential candidacy. But it would be hard to disregard the role that New Hampshire has played in American politics during the cycle of choosing candidates. They are in the forefront. It's a state that is, in a lot of ways, unlike much of the rest of the country, but nonetheless, it's a place where retail politics can be engaged. I think there's a great courtship that takes place of voters in New Hampshire. And one of the great ironies of New Hampshire, even though it's a very small state, it has 2 members of the House of Representatives, and it has, like all others, 2 senators. But the day or that evening, once the votes are counted, even if it's a large number of people who don't participate, the American news media, they will herald a front runner. And I've been through this many times on the Democratic side, all the way back to George McGovern, and the ability of this very small state to have this extraordinary influence on the rest of our political body always stands out for me, because I've been there so many times and done door knocking for candidates that I have supported. And oftentimes what comes out of New Hampshire is the publicity that accrues, but also it's an opportunity for an individual to establish great credibility. If you remember all the way back to George Bush Sr.'s victory in the Iowa caucuses, and then he was defeated in New Hampshire, but after the Iowa caucuses, he established himself as a would-be vice presidential candidate for Ronald Reagan. Those are examples that come to mind. Rockefeller beat Goldwater in New Hampshire. Carter beat Kennedy. I've been part of this, as you could tell, for a lot of years, witnessing what happened. In the McGovern case, we actually won 37% of the vote, and the national news media in 1972, they declared that we were the front runner all of a sudden. So part of it is perception, and part of it, if you're lucky, you can attach to reality.
Yeah, it seems as if voters like to be with, a winner or someone who's perceived that way. Democrats are taking a different approach to New Hampshire this time around. Do you think that will have any impact on how President Biden goes about his reelection?
Well, I understand the geographic realities. I understand the argument that you want, in the early stages of the primary cycle, you want a more fulsome view of what America looks like in the November election. But at the same time, I also think that knowing New Hampshire, they are unlikely to let this go quietly. I'm assuming that this is not over yet. And I also think that President Biden, by winning the South Carolina primary just 2.5 years, almost 3 years ago, it shows you what can happen in terms of perception. And overnight, Joe Biden became not only the front runner, but the established candidate who went on to win the election. He never campaigned in Texas. To my knowledge, he never campaigned in Massachusetts. But in short order, he was the front runner.
Massachusetts Congressman Richard Neal is a Democrat from the 1st District. Thank you for your time, Congressman Neal. When we come back the next time, I want to ask you about your recent meeting with the British Prime Minister.